Egocentrism is the tendency to see reality as centered on oneself. Egocentrism are selfish, self-abused people who view their interests, ideas, and values as superior to everyone else. The cognitive shortcomings that underlie the failure in both children and adults to recognize the idiosyncratic nature of one's knowledge or the subjective nature of one's perceptions. A selfish person believes that they are the center of attention but gets no satisfaction from their own admiration. Both talkers and narcissists are people whose egos are greatly influenced by the approval of others. While for eccentrics, this may or may not be true.
Sociogenesis is group-centered thinking, just as egocentrism can hinder rational thinking by focusing essentially on the self. Sociogenesis can hinder rational thinking by focusing essentially on the group. Sociocentrism can distort critical thinking in many ways. Two of the most important are group bias and conformism. Group bias is the tendency to see one outgroup as being inherently better than others. Social scientists tell us that thinking is extremely common throughout human history and across culture. Just as we seem naturally inclined to hold inflated view of ourselves, so we find it easy to hold inflated view of our family, our community, or our nation. Most people absorb group bias unconsciously, usually from early childhood. It is common, for example, for people to grow up thinking that their society, institutions, and values are better than those of other societies. In each group, only one of the 8 participants were unaware of the two nations of the experiment. The other 7 were confederates working in less with the experimenter. Unwarranted assumption and stereotypes. An assumption is something we take for granted, something we believe to be true without any proof or conclusive evidence. Almost everything we think and do is based on assumptions.
An assumption is something we take for granted, something we believe to be true without any proof or conclusive evidence. Almost everything we think and do is based on assumption. If the weather reports call for rain, we take an umbrella because we assume such a meteorologist is not lying. Such a report is based on scientific analysis of weather patterns. Such instruments are accurate, and so forth. There may be no proof that any source is true, but we release that it is wiser to test the umbrella than to insist that the weather bureau provides scientific evidence to justify its prediction. Although we often hear the injunction, "Don't assume," it would be impossible to get through a day without making assumptions. In fact, many of our daily actions are based on assumptions. We have drawn from the pattern in our experience. You go to class at a scheduled time because you assume that class is being held at its normal hour and in its same place. Such assumptions are warranted, which means that we have a good reason to have them. When you see a driver coming toward you with the turn signal on, you have a good reason to believe such a driver intends to turn. You might be incorrect, and it might be safe to withhold action until you are certain, but your assumption is not unreasonable. Unwarranted assumption, however unreasonable. An unwarranted assumption is something taken for granted without good reason. Such assumptions often prevent our seeing things clearly. For example, our attraction for someone might cause us to assume that he or she feels the same way, and thus interpret that person's action incorrectly.
One of the most common types of unwarranted assumption is a stereotype. The word stereotype comes from the printing press era, when plates of stereotype were used to produce identical copies of one page. Similarly, when we stereotype as the word is now used, we assume that individual people have all been stamped from one plate. So all politicians are alike, all Muslims, all African, all Americans, professors, women, and so forth. When we form an opinion of someone that is based not on his or her individual qualities, but rather on his or her membership in a particular group, we are assuming that virtually all members of that group are alike, because people are not identical, no matter what race or other similarities they share. Stereotype conceptions will often be false or misleading. Typically, stereotypes are arrived at through a process known as hasty generalization, in which one draws a conclusion about a large class of things, in this case people, from a small sample. If we met one South Belgian who is rude, we might jump to the conclusion that all South Belgians are rude. Or we might generalize from what we have heard from a few friends or read in a single news story. Often the media, advertisement, the news, movies, and so forth encourage stereotyping by the way they portray groups or people. The assumptions we need to become most consistent of are not the ones that lead to our routine behaviors, such as carrying an umbrella or going to class, but the ones on which we base our more important attitudes, actions, and decisions. If we are conscious of our tendency to stereotype, we can take measures to end it.
One of the barriers to critical thinking is relativistic thinking. Relativism is the view that truth is a matter of opinion. There are two popular forms of relativism: subjectivism and cultural relativism. Subjectivism is the view that truth is a matter of individual opinion. According to subjectivism, whatever an individual believes is true for that person, and there is no such thing as objective or absolute truth. The truth that exists independent of what anyone believes. The other common form of relativism is cultural relativism. This is the view that truth is a matter of social and cultural opinion. In other words, cultural relativism is the view that what is true for person A is what person B culture of society believes is true. By far the most common form of relativism is moral relativism. Like relativism, Generally, moral relativism comes into major form: moral subjectivism and cultural moral relativism. Moral subjectivism is a view that what is morally right and good for an individual A is whatever A believes is morally right and good. The other major form of moral relativism is cultural moral relativism, the view that what is morally right and good for an individual A is whatever B society or culture believes is morally right and good. Cultural moral relativism is a very popular view today, especially among the young. There are two major reasons people seem to find it so attractive. One had to do with the nature of the moral disagreement, and the other concerned the value of tolerance. Another reason people find cultural moral relativism attractive is that it seems to support to the value of tolerance.
In ethics, there is widespread disagreement. This disagreement often goes very deep, and there seems to be no rational way to resolve many of them. What this does, some people conclude in that there is no objective truth in ethics. Morality is just a matter of individual and societal opinion. Another reason people find cultural moral relativism attractive in that is them to support the belief of tolerance. Cultural moral relativism seems to imply that we must be tolerant of other culture, moral belief and belief. If culture I believe that polygamy is wrong and culture B believe that it's right, then culture I must agree that polygamy is right for culture B, no matter how offensive the practice may be to culture A. This case highlights very serious problems with cultural moral relativism. One, relativism makes it possible for us to criticize other culture, custom, and belief, even though that intuitively seem to us to be terribly wrong. 2. Relativism makes it impossible for us to criticize our society, custom, and belief. 3. Relativism leaves out the idea of moral progress. 4. Relativism can lead to conflicting moral duty. Thus, cultural moral relativism has consequences that make it very difficult to accept. In addition, however, it can be thought that two main reasons people are attracted to cultural moral relativism: ethical disagreement and the value of tolerance are not good reasons at all. First, the fact that there is deep disagreement, this ethical that is not object moral choice, and ethics is just a matter of opinions. Hardly people disagree over whether God exists, whether there is an afterlife, and so forth. Yet we don't conclude from this that there is no objective truth about this matter, but whether he exists is not simply a matter of opinion. Second, cultural moral relativism does not necessarily support the value of tolerance. Relativism tells us that we should accept the culture and belief of our society. Thus, if you live in a intolerant social, relativism implies that you too should be intolerant.
intolerance. The fact that people disagree so much about ethics does not show that moral choice is simply a matter of opinion, but it should make us culture and open mind regardless of our ethical benefits. In this way, relativism can teach us an impossible lesson about the value of intellectual humility. We can list it just by opening our hearts and mind and thinking critically about the challenge of living an ethical life.
Wishful thinking means subjective way of thinking, willpower, optimistic despite reality. Wishful thinking is the formation of belief based on what might be pleasing to imagine rather than on evidence, rationality, or reality. It is a process of resolving conflicts between belief and desires. Methodology to stemming wishful thinking are diverse. When we become more self-critical about our ideas and test them in the real world, we become more scientific as opposed to wishful thinking and as a present.